you're next to go. If you're the general manager, get some players in the later rounds. You seem to be pretty good at that. You're not so great in the early rounds, maybe, but in the later rounds, you're okay. But I don't even think Sean Payton would overshadow Dion in any way. And I don't see any, they're stuck with Russell Wilson for at least the next 2 years, because it would be so costly to dispose of him, to get rid of him. First of all, you can't trade him. Nobody want to trade for him with that contract. So yes, that would be a problem for any coach coming in. You can't do anything with the quarterback. You can disempower him. That would be a nice first step, because he has an office over the building right now. I've never heard of that before. Even Peyton Manning or John Elway having an office in the building and an entourage that has a run of the building. I mean, they come and go as they please. And the amusing thing to me is seeing all these players anonymously, of course, griping about it, and it comes out in the media naturally that they aren't thrilled with this arrangement, and he kind of comes and goes as he pleases, and if he's 10 minutes late to a meeting, so what? But some of these same players then in response are quoted by name as saying, oh, he's my boy and he's great. And I know how all this works. It's some of the same people who are anonymously leaking stories that he's a bad guy and he's a prima donna are the same ones who by name will defend him and say, oh, that's not how I feel. Well, it's exactly how the players feel. And a couple of the players have been particularly the defensive tackle who got into a little bit of a scuffle with him a few weeks back during the game. Sometimes it's spilled over and it becomes apparent that the new coach is going to have his hands full, and they don't have draft picks, at least in the early rounds. And if they, if it's Sean Payton, they won't have, probably in 2024, they won't have a first round pick either. They do have a first round pick this year because they traded Bradley Chubb to Miami, and they didn't even get Miami's pick because Miami's first round pick belongs to San Francisco, and you know where San Francisco is going to finish, right? They're going to be one of the last 5 teams drafting in the first round. So they'll have a first round pick this year, but it'll be very late in the draft and late in the round anyway. And so that their chances for improvement next year are basically slim and none. But I think Colorado is going to be a very interesting story to follow. And don't ask me who the next Bronco coach is going to be, because I can't give you an answer with any certainty. And I've asked people who would have more insight than I would have, and they don't know either. But even if I told you, I didn't believe Dion would ever come to Colorado. Partly because, well, it's Colorado and they haven't won anything in 20 years. The other reason was that I couldn't believe that a Southeastern Conference school wouldn't hire him. Auburn, for example, made no sense to me. But in this case, Auburn's one of those schools that thinks the football team should win at least 10 games every year. And when they don't do that, they just fire the coach. And there are people, whether they be boosters or people in the athletic department, maybe even the athletic director, who believe that, if they had to, they could do a better coaching job than the current coach does. So if they had any contact with Dion, they'd be saying, well, no, we're in charge here. You just coach the team. And CU was just the opposite. They came in and said, we'll change all our admissions requirements for you. You can hire any combination of assistant coaches you want, pay them anything you want. We'll pay you anything you want. We'll give you total control. The athletic director will be no more influential during the course of the football season than any one of you in this room right now. And they also had the advantage of having 2 months to recruit Dion, because they had let Carl Durrell go in early October. And Rick George did a great job of recruiting Dion and convincing him that he was better off coming here than he would be going anywhere else. Now, I don't know how long he'll be here. I do remember when Mel Tucker took the job, now known as Midnight Mel for the way he departed CU. He took the job in 2019, and he told close friends at the time, I won't make the same mistake that some of my predecessors have made here. If I have a good year here, I'm gone. I'm gone. I'm not hanging around and let them fire me. I have one good year here, I'm gone. Turned out he had 1 year here, which was good, not great, not bowl-worthy. And Michigan State, in their infinite wisdom, gave him $95 million to go to Michigan State, and obviously off he went. And so the other advantage CU had, and I think they're the only major program to have this distinction, is that they have hired now, I believe, 3 African-American coaches, one right after the other, 3 in a row. I don't think that's happened at any other major program anyway, through the years. So they had some credibility, and I'm sure they appealed to Dion's ego too. You know, if you turn this program around, you can pretty much go wherever you want to turn any program around. So I agree. I think that'll be exciting. I know you have some questions here, and I've already asked you one, so I won't ask any more, and I'll let you ask some questions. But very quickly on what else is going on in Denver sports, you'll all be relieved to know the Rockies remain the Rockies. There are 30 Major League Baseball teams, and 29 are pretty busy during the off season most years. The Rockies are great. They don't change a bit. And a friend of mine ran across Drew Goodman, their TV play-by-play voice, this week, and asked him if he was looking forward to the start of spring training next month. And he didn't seem terribly enthused. And the old line on from a famous baseball announcer was that the best thing in broadcasting is to be the play-by-play man for a good to great Major League Baseball team, even over 162 games. It's a blast. And he was asked, what's the worst thing in broadcasting? And he said, to do 162 games for a bad baseball team that you know is going to be bad. It has no hope whatsoever. And that's the Rockies. You know they're going to lose 90 games this year. I mean, you just stamp that in right at the beginning. It's a given. And the manager, who I think happens to be a pretty good manager, but he knows that as long as he doesn't criticize the owners, he can build a ranch out in the country here in 2 or 3 years, manage as long as he wants, take their money, gets paid pretty well, I guess. And as long as he doesn't criticize ownership, he'll never be fired. So the Rockies of 2023 will probably look a lot like the Rockies of 2022 and 2021 and 2020 and 2019. But I will tell you something. In each of the last 6 years, the Rockies have finished with a better winning percentage than the Broncos have. So that kind of brings it full circle. And there are 3 teams that I follow during the winter months, and there are a few of you in here. Brother Brown here in the front row, who loves DU hockey and attends games on a regular basis, and I love DU high. I just love college hockey in general, and DU is a great example of what makes college hockey different from college basketball or college football. Small schools like DU can not only compete with bigger schools in college hockey, they can build better programs than bigger schools. And that's the nice thing about hockey. Hockey is not a numbers game. It is more qualitative than quantitative. And DU won the national championship last year. It's 9th tying Michigan for most national hockey titles in history. Both have 9. DU upset Michigan in the semifinals last year, preventing Michigan from winning its 10th, keeping them at 9, and DU went on and won its 9th with a 32-year-old head coach who I think was the youngest coach to win a college hockey title at age 32 in some 59 years. And 59 years ago in 1963, the people in this room outnumber the number of college hockey teams there were in 1963. My school, St. Lawrence University, was a premier program in 1963. Now there's 62 teams in Division I hockey, and St. Lawrence is lucky to be in the upper half. And if it's the upper half, it's barely the upper half. But even St. Lawrence, back in the late 80s, made a national championship game, and DU, of course, when DU gets to the Frozen Four, DU tends to win. They don't lose very often. And of course, they won last year, and I think they lost their 5 of their leading 6 scorers, but they brought back 5 defensemen from last year and all 3 goaltenders from last year. And honestly, I think they might be better this year than they were last year. Now, that doesn't mean they'll win the title again, because sometimes, even if you're the best team, things happen, injuries and so on, you don't win. But they are a blast to watch, and that is the best buy for your money in town, I think, right now, to go out there. So if you're a hockey fan at all, that's a great team to watch. They had a bad game a week ago last night, but they're basically automatic at home. And last night they won 7-0 against a league opponent, and they're just terrific. The Nuggets and the Avalanche are the LCU basketball I follow too, and I like Tad Boyle a lot. He's a good coach, and they have an interesting team this year in that they, when they're playing ranked teams, they play with great energy and skill, and they then turn around and lose the next game to Grambling State or something. It's really up and down. And Tad Boyle, after a recent game, was coming into the press room to do his post game, and he always makes some comments initially, and I've kidded him through the years that in his opening comments he takes away about 2 or 3 questions I'm going to ask him, because he's addressing these things before I can ask him. And he sits down, the first words out of his mouth were, we are the most Jekyll and Hyde team I've ever coached in my life. And I'll leave it to all you scholars, pointing at us, the scholars in the meeting, to remind me of which is which. And we were real good tonight. So I guess does that make us Dr. Jekyll? And I think that's right. I think the good is Dr. Jekyll, right? The bad is Mr. Hyde. But they're fun to watch. But the Nuggets and Avalanche, the Avalanche are coming out of a championship year, and for virtually the entire season, at least a third of their team has been hurt. Mm-hmm. So they are not doing very well. And unless they get 2 defensemen, Byram and Manson, and 2 of the forwards, Nichushkin and Landeskog, back here in the next couple of weeks, which doesn't seem likely, they might miss the playoffs this year, which would be too bad. But under the circumstances, it's hard to be too disappointed with them. The Nuggets might be the best team in the NBA right now. Now, this is January, and whether they'll be the best team in April, May, June remains to be seen. Nikola Jokic is the best player in the world, and he talk about worth the price of admission by himself. He is a unique player in the history of the game. No 7-footer has ever thrown passes the way he throws them, can score at will. I mean, there are times when he's in the game where you think the Nuggets can score every time down the floor without really trying very hard. He is that good, and he's made all his teammates better. He's made them more unselfish. because he's the most unselfish player. One of the ESPN commentators said recently, I had to give up the ghost on Bill Walton being the greatest passing big man of all time. I've made that argument for years. I can't make it anymore. Even Walton says Jokic is better as a passer, and Jokic is the best passing big man ever. And his colleague jumped right in and said, the heck with best passing center. He may be the best passer in the history of basketball, regardless of position. I mean, he throws passes I've never seen anybody throw, and that includes, Bob Cousy from way back, or Jason Kidd or John Stockton, some of the great playmakers who are mostly guards of all time. Larry Bird, great passer, Rick Barry, but Jokic is amazing. And last night, the Nuggets, he hurt his wrist, and they played against the Clippers, pretty good team in Los Angeles, without Jokic. And generally, when Jokic isn't on the floor, they aren't very good. And they won last night by 12 points and led pretty much the whole game. 115-103, played a beautiful game at both ends. And now they're trying on defense a little harder. And that's made them even better. I think they're 29-13 right now. So they might go down as the best Nugget team, and they should be, because he's won the MVP award 2 years in a row. And he probably won't win 3 years in a row, but I think he's better this year than he's been the last 2 years, because he's involving his teammates, and his scoring is down a little bit, but his rebounds are the same, and his assists are basically the same or a little more. And the team is much better. I'm not crazy about their coach, because I think he fiddles around with his rotation too much, but he's done a good job this year. So if there's anything else that I haven't covered, feel free to ask about it, and I'll just open things up. Hey, Jerry.
What's going to happen on the TV coverage of those two? You see that getting resolved? The altitude?
Quick answer is no. Altitude, Cronky Sports has been running over the last, I guess it's more than 3 years now, a fairly aggressive campaign, public relations campaign, blaming Comcast. And this is like one of those deals where nobody likes cable companies, right? But it's hard to be sympathetic to Cronky Sports on this. And to me, it's ridiculous. Fortunately, the teams are good enough that they do appear on national television. But if you're a Comcast subscriber, most of the games you can't see. We have, don't ask me to get too technical in explaining this. We have a box that allows us to basically plug into DirecTV and get the games at the radio station. So if I want to watch a game, I can go down to the radio station still and watch it. They haven't taken away my key to the building yet. I'm sure that's an oversight. They'll get around to it. So I can go in and watch the games.
Well, my wife appreciates it because she gets more time with me instead of me watching sports.
Yeah. Well, that's true. That's true. But it's a shame. I think more for younger fans who would really, be season ticket holders down the road in future years, and are being deprived of the chance to see Jokic or Jamal Murray or Nathan McKinnon or Miko Rantanen, any of the great Avalanche stars. It's ridiculous. Again, I'm not expert on these matters, but declare it a loss leader and move on. I mean, honestly, and a lot of fans, I think, misunderstand and think the team pays the cable company when actually it's the other way around. So they're overcharging. Nobody watches Altitude apart from the games. And even some of us dedicated sports fans don't often sit down and watch a game from start to finish. Not sometimes, certainly during the playoffs you might, but of course during the playoffs, after the first round, national TV picks up the coverage.
Right.
So it's both good and bad that the teams are eminently watchable, very entertaining. good in the fact that they're on national TV a lot, so you can bypass this dispute, but bad because, you know, if you want to see the best basketball player in the world, you have to go to the game. If they're at home and if they're on the road, there's a chance you won't be able to see it at all unless you go to your local neighborhood tavern. You know, I think in most cases would probably have it. I have a quick story. A couple of friends and I went to Alabama in early October to watch Alabama play Texas A&M, and we actually stayed in an Airbnb in Birmingham and went to Tallahassee for the game on Saturday, and went up there again on Sunday to look around at some of the museums and eat at some of the restaurants. And the food in Birmingham is great too. But anyway, we get in there late on a Thursday afternoon, and the Thursday night game is the Broncos in Indianapolis. And we figured Birmingham is probably not a big NFL town. And of course, the Thursday night games this year are on Prime.
Right.
And do you really want to get Prime just to watch a Thursday night football game that in many cases won't be very good? And why else would you subscribe to Prime? So we assume that most places in Birmingham wouldn't have it. We had a very nice meal. Place had the NFL Network up, and they're of course up to game time, showing the warm-ups and everything else and doing a pregame show. So we call the manager over and ask him if he has Prime, and he's like, "What's that? Isn't the game up there?" And he said, "No, it's not on NFL Network anymore. It's on Prime." So obviously that wasn't going to work. And so we're calling all over town. And we finally get a hold of a gal at a Hooters. And so we ask her, and she says, "Oh yeah, we've got it." And so we've heard that from other establishments who don't have it and think they do, because again, they think like the first guy, right, that it's on the NFL Network. It isn't. And so not me, but one of the other guys had the misfortune to ask her, "Are you sure that you have it?" And she says, "Yes, I'm sure." As if you take me for somebody who doesn't know because I'm a woman or whatever. So he got an earful. Yes, we have it. So, not our first choice, obviously, but we were going to go down to Hooters. It's about a mile away. And we're on our way to our car at the end of the block, and we're walking down and we're looking inside a couple of the restaurants, and we're literally getting into the car, and we look across and we see what looks like a football game going on one of the TVs inside. It was literally 200 feet away from where we had been eating. And we go in, and it's a small screen. And he said, "You've got Prime?" And the guy says, "Oh, yes." And he said, "Why don't you guys go outside? It's a nice night. We got a huge big screen TV with the game on and everything." And sure, they were probably the only establishment in Birmingham that both had the game and had it on the big screen. So we go out there, there are three of us, and there are picnic tables all over the place. There's a couple and a dog out there. And we're looking around, so we're the only 6 people in Birmingham watching this game. Probably, other than the people at Hooters. Other than people at Hooters who are watching. And even the dog got bored because the game was so bad by halftime. The couple and the dog took off. We went across the street and got ice cream cones and came back. And the game, as you may or may not remember, I hope you don't remember, came down to the last 2 minutes, still tied. And one of the guys gets up in our group, one of the 3 of us gets up and says, "Where's the Airbnb?" And we said, "Well," and the guy who had arrived first earlier that day and got into the Airbnb tells him, "Oh, it's about a mile from here." And he says, "You guys can stay, but I'll crawl 1 mile to the Airbnb rather than watch any more of this. Well, it looks like it's going to go overtime. So we laughed and I said, listen, the overtime's only 10 minutes. It'll probably be over pretty quickly. Stay and watch. And he's half kidding, but he's all but begging us to let him leave. And he says, I'll walk. You can stay here with the car and you can follow me. Yeah, and he was right. It was bad. That was the game where they had the game-winning pass in the end zone. Receivers wide open. I think it was KJ Hamler waving back in the end zone, and Wilson never sees him and throws to a covered receiver, and the pass gets broken up, and that's the game. And they blow another one. And the next day, we're listening to the radio that they have either religious stations or sports talk stations in Birmingham, Alabama. And we're listening to some of the talk, and they don't normally talk about NFL football, but they must have had half a dozen calls from people saying, was that the worst game you've ever seen in your life last night? And the local guys, it's probably the only time they've had sustained conversation all year about a Thursday night football game. But, actually, that trip, some of you heard me talk about it, it was very educational for me. We did all the sightseeing from the 16th Street Baptist Church and the park across the way where they put the fire hoses on the kids and sick the dogs on them and everything and all that. And we went inside the church and we walked down the staircase where the bomb was planted at the bottom, and it was kind of eerie, but we stumbled on some things there, and we were out all the time. I'm sure there's still problems in Birmingham, but it made me realize again, there are problems everywhere that we need to address ourselves to. And I saw in 5 days more interracial couples in Birmingham than I'd seen in 5 years out here. And they have problems. We went and visited a place, an old ballpark, Rickwood Field, which turns out to be the oldest baseball park in America, older than Fenway Park, older than Wrigley Field, older than all of them. And I had never heard of it. And we kind of stumbled on it. And there was a fantasy camp going on inside, and we made our way around Rickwood Field, and it's a who's who of baseball history. Willie Mays played there. All the Alabama baseball players, including I think there are 14 Hall of Famers who hail from Alabama, at least 14, and a number of other very good players. More or less all at one time played at Rickwood Field. So we're walking around and absorbing all this history, and we go into the shop there, and one of my friends mentions to the proprietor that I'm a sports talk host back in Denver. He must have spent 2 hours telling me about Rickwood Field and showing me pictures and newspaper clips and videos and everything else. And he says, it's too bad you didn't come 2 weeks ago. You would have seen Reggie Jackson, Raleigh Fingers, and Gene Tennis here for a signing. They all played at Rickwood Field. They're playing. Reggie hit mammoth home runs there. And Willie Mays won a Negro League World Series there at the age of 16 in 1948, roaming center field. And I'm buying some stuff, and one of the things I wanted to buy was Birmingham Black Barons baseball cap. Not Birmingham Barons, Birmingham Black Barons, the Negro League team. There were two teams that played there: the Birmingham Barons and the Birmingham Black Barons. So I buy the cap BBB, and I said, I'm going to wear this to the football game the next day and see how many of these young kids recognize it. I kid you not, there were a dozen people who stopped me as we were going into the game or going around campus in the hours before the game the next day. And one literally walked by me and kind of tugged at my arm as he was walking by. And I turned around and he said, that's the coolest cap I've ever seen. And I know what that stands for. And there were about a dozen of these kids, these college kids, who knew all about the Birmingham Black Barons, and I was, very impressed. Tend to think that younger people don't have a sense of history, and certainly in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, students don't know much about the Birmingham Black Barons, but there were about a dozen who stopped me who did. And a friend of mine was wearing one of Bear Bryant's old houndstooth hats, and he got stopped, which we expected, but I got stopped almost as often for the BBB on the cap. So there is some historical awareness there. But I know Phil Thompson had a question for me about.
Where did you eat in Birmingham? Did you go to Highlands Bar and Grill?
I don't think so, but we.
Was it Five Points? Was there a Methodist church with?
Yes, yeah. Methodist and Baptist, right?
Yeah. Sorry.
In Birmingham, yeah.
Both of my kids were born in Birmingham.
Yeah.
That was not my question. My question was about the portal.
Yeah,
I
transfer
don't
portal.
understand it, where it came from. Does it do any good?
Well, it's good for players, and I think it's fair.
Explain what it is.
Because normally years ago when you transferred, you'd have to wait a year before you were eligible to play at your next school. And I mean, coaches could bail out of contracts all the time and go coach next year. So it didn't seem fair that players would have to wait a year after they transferred. And, between that and the name, image, and likeness court ruling, it's opened up kind of a circumstance in which there aren't many rules. There aren't really any rules that they've developed yet. And I think Colorado lost a couple dozen a year ago, not this year, but a year ago. And now they're getting people with Dion. They're getting people who want to come here, including about half his team from Jackson State, which is not unusual because Norvell, the coach up at CSU, took half his Nevada team with him to Colorado State. Not that it did him that much good competitively this year. They weren't much better. But yeah, it's tied in because there are financial inducements that can be brought into play too to get a kid to transfer. We'll give you more playing time and you'll make more money here than you would have made. And this will be the real challenge for Dion, because Dion himself can't pay the players.
Right.
The local merchants will have to step up in Boulder if they hope to recruit the best players while Dion is there and even get transfers. They'll have to see it as being in their best interest. No, it's great for players. For competitive balance, maybe not so good. If any of you saw the national championship game, 65-7. I mean, Georgia lost 5 defensive starters from last year's championship team, and they might have been better this year than they were last year. And I remember last year, one of the Fox commentators saying you could find more 5-star recruits on Georgia's defense than you could in all of the Pac-12 conference put together. On for entire teams, all the Pac-12 had fewer 5-star recruits than one school in the SEC. And Alabama's probably pretty close to Georgia in that respect. But it's the wild, wild west, and the rich get richer. And I think within 2 or 3 years, we'll probably see not only 12 teams in the playoffs, which I'm not crazy about, but we'll see maybe 3 major leagues, SEC, Big Ten, and some amalgamation of ACC, Pac-12, Big 12. And there'll be 50 teams playing at one level and about 80 teams playing at a slightly lower level, like one level. And we'll see if Colorado is with Dion gets into the top 50. Wow, Larry.
Speaking of money that the players are making or can make, what do you think about that NCAA rule that that collegiate players can, now I have seen like a couple of Heisman Trophy winners on TV a lot and commercials. So
Oh yeah,
some of them are
Bryce Young.
but I wonder about everybody else.
Well, it's the stars who get a lion's share of the money, obviously. And I noticed a couple of quarterbacks who might have come out for the draft are staying at Ohio State, CJ Stroud, I think, and Williams at USC. They're staying largely because they're making as much money in NIL as they would make in the NFL the first year.
Wow.
Or close to it.
Okay.
And so they're staying another year largely for that reason. But it got to the point where last summer, Nick Saban was speaking at a fundraiser in Tuscaloosa, and he's usually pretty smart and pretty smooth and understands that you're always being recorded. And he came out and made some statements about mainly how the boosters had to step up with and start competing with Georgia and other schools, which he went on to mention for players, because they were getting outbid. And he said at one point, Texas A&M just bought all its players. Flat out, Texas A&M, which did not please the Texas A&M coach. And it's one of the reasons we wanted to go to this game, because we thought they might be the two best teams in the country. And even if they aren't, these two coaches hate each other. It'll be worth the price of admission on that score alone. So I guess the coaches sort of patched things up. Although the first time Saban tried to call Jimbo Fisher, the Texas A&M coach, to apologize, Fisher wouldn't take his call. But they had a league meeting after that, and I guess they talked it out.
Okay.
But Dion got brought into that too, because Dion got accused of buying players at Jackson State because he got, I think it was a defensive back,
Hunter,
who was the best in the country.
Yeah.
And Saban was like, why would he go to Jackson State if he's not getting paid? And that was the inducement. That's why I got him. And Dion actually was pretty good about it.
But now they're going to play at CU, right?
Yeah.
They all took the portal. I mean, a lot of them.
Yeah.
They come in. Yeah. Including his son.
Yep.
Yeah.
The quarterback. So they'll have a quarterback next
Yeah.
change the subject completely. The International League is going, or the AAA in general, the entire AAA is going to go to electronic call balls and strikes this year. What do you think of that?
I like it. I occasionally go back, I have a lot of free time on my hands, and watch old baseball games. And there used to be, of course, American League umpires, National League umpires, and they stood in different spots, and I just look at it now and it just seems so arbitrary. Yeah, I'm all for that. I mean, you'll still need base umpires, so on, but they have they don't have linesmen in tennis anymore for the major tournaments.
Right.
So why not do it that way? So yeah, it's experimental, but I think Major League Baseball will pick up on that. Ken.
I agree with you on that, because sometimes you'll hear even announcers say this umpire is a high ball strike or no ball strike.
Yeah. Well, then they all have these boxes, right? There's in the strike zone, and on the Rocky games, Drew Goodman's a good friend of mine, but it kind of drives me crazy because every time a pitch is outside the box and gets called a strike, they go crazy, especially if it's against the Rockies. And they go nuts, and it just, have it done electronically.
I mean, give us a feel, if you feel comfortable doing this, where you think college football will be 5 or 6 years from now. You kind of mentioned,
Yeah.
I kind of feel like you're gonna have a AAA, AA.
Oh, yeah.
AA.
I don't know if it'll be that many categories, but there'll definitely be a kind of a super league or leagues that determine who makes the playoffs, and there'll be somewhere between 40 and 50 schools who are in that category, and everybody else will break off, and I'm not sure how that will work or look exactly, but I just think they're moving in that direction.
Thank you.
And they're, I mean, to say semi-professional, they're in many ways totally professional now. Sorry.
Kumbaya. So what steps would you suggest to get the professional game back to the fact it's a game?
Good luck with that. No, I mean, I went to some Rockies games this year, and I will give the Montfort's credit for one thing. They have kept ticket prices at a very reasonable level. Probably higher than they should be considering the product we're watching, but the ticket prices are good. The ballpark's great. And you know, I think for a lot of fans, it is a game, and they'll watch it casually, but they just like the ballpark experience, and baseball's probably the closest to that. But you know, football is big business, and football doesn't need fans. They make a profit on TV money alone before they sell a single ticket. So when fans complain, and the football fans about stadium services, probably they're on pretty fair ground in complaining, because you can sit home and watch all the games on Red Zone now, pretty much. I mean, you don't get entire games, obviously. They can't show all the games at once, but they do more than just take games when a team is in the red zone.
Right.
I mean, they really do a great job. And I'm thinking, why would you go to a game when, if you're following your local team, you can watch the whole game on TV, or you can watch all the games on Red Zone, including your local game, and get the gist of everything that's going on. But for basketball, and I think for hockey, it's the same way. I have trouble going to the games now because there's just so much noise, and not crowd noise, but just music blaring and PA announcers screaming. And it's just, I don't know, they must think young people just like noise. Not the young people I know. They're turned off by that too. But the idea that you can just go and watch a game without being bombarded with all this noise and pageantry and ceremony, it's all big business now. And I can get into college games for free around here, but they take forever. The commercial breaks are 3.5 minutes long in some cases. 3.5 minutes.
Right.
If you watch an old baseball game on YouTube or listen to one, between innings or between half innings, 1 minute. Old games, 1 minute. They run one 1 minute spot, and then it's back to the game. Now it's 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. No, those days are long gone, unfortunately.
When you look at a losing team, when you analyze a losing team, is there a defined process whereby they take the elements of success from ownership, coaching, players, attitude, and put them in a matrix and apply them to a team that's needs some help? Is there a defined process for doing that?
There should be a better process for that.
Okay.
Now, in fairness to these owners, they weren't officially in place until August. And the head coach they hired and fired in December, hired last January, long before the new owners were in place. And the mistake I think they made was that, again, through the interview process, which can distort a candidate's qualifications, I think, sometimes. Through the interview process, they took someone who was very enthusiastic and essentially a cheerleader and said, that's leadership. Well, no, that's not leadership. He was a professional cheerleader. He was obviously unqualified to be a head coach, very successful assistant coach, but never been a head coach before. And that's 3 in a row they've hired now who have been first time head coaches. But even you'd think that the new ownership, given their business interests and experience, would understand how to build a culture, would understand what leadership is and where it needs to come from and how it should be exercised. But a lot of these people who are expert business people get into pro sports and they're like fans. They forget all their business instincts and their methods for hiring and promoting, and they forget about that and they become fans and they say, well, I love this guy, he's enthusiastic. Well, this guy's major objectives seem to be making friends with the players. And I was telling a story earlier, and I didn't mention that the head coach was one of the guys who would call the stadium executive after losses at home, which were frequent. And he'd say, I don't like the music. Seriously, I don't like the music you're playing. And then the stadium guy would say, well, you know, we pick what the fans like. The fans like the music. And the coach's response was, bleep the fans. This is Mr. Nice Guy, enthusiasm all the way around, hug everybody, everybody's my friend. And a friend of mine referred to him as Buddy Hackett. And some of you are old enough to remember Buddy Hackett. I thought that was good. Buddy Hackett, Flip Wilson. Except Buddy Hackett and Flip Wilson in real life weren't nearly as funny as these two guys. Yes.
Well, if it was up to you, who would you hire for the next head coach?
We're writing this down. Sam.
Well, I said that, and I said this on the air. I thought the coach who was fired this year in Indianapolis and replaced by Jeff Saturday, who was in the TV studio, former player, never been a head coach. And their problems in Indianapolis weren't related to the coach they fired, obviously, because they won one more game. The rest of the year, they were lucky to win that one game. And the head coach is great on TV, but he's not qualified to be a coach. But in any case, Frank Reich is his name. And he had a winning record actually in Indianapolis. I think it was 40-33-1 before they fired him. He had a 10-win season, 11-win season, made the playoffs. And he was the offensive coordinator in Philadelphia in 2017 when they beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl and scored 41 points with Nick Foles, the quarterback. And he and Doug Peterson, who's now coaching Jacksonville, and I think Jacksonville is going to win today or tomorrow, whenever they play against the Chargers. They're two of my favorite coaches, and I was around both of them at the Super Bowl when they beat the Patriots, and they got very little or no attention compared to the Patriot coaches, compared to Josh McDaniels and obviously Bill Belichick. But I think they're both great coaches, especially offensively. But he's not a big name. He hasn't won a Super Bowl as a head coach. So I'm sure they won't follow my recommendation. He would be my guy. I think the guy they will hire and they'll pay him $20 million a year. And they'll compensate New Orleans. I think they'll end up hiring Sean Payton. Jim Harbaugh is the other name that's come up. There are two things about his temperament, one that's good and one that's maybe not so good. The good thing is he's an old school, hard-nosed, no nonsense guy. And he certainly wouldn't treat Russell Wilson with kid gloves the way he was treated this year. And he certainly wouldn't have the kind of power and influence that Russell Wilson was used to having this year. Harbaugh would take that. But the problem with that he wants total control, like he's had at Michigan, wants total control, and you'll never have that in the NFL. Belichick may have something close to that, Andy Reid, Kyle Shanahan, but for the most part, a coach isn't going to have that, and Sean Payton understands that. He understands that, and I guess if you paid me $20 million, I wouldn't mind ceding control and to general manager, owner, whomever. Their idea, the ownership idea, is that you pay somebody big money and they'll be a great coach. I don't know that anybody here can turn this around right away. And they're going to have to understand that. And I know they paid $4.6 billion for the team, and they were told, I'm sure, oh, it's a great investment.
Yeah, you know.
Because this team's on the rise, and they weren't interested or smart enough to say, well, wait a minute, that's what they've been saying for 5 years now, that the team is on the rise. The team's about ready to break out. And Case Keenum is the savior of quarterback. And then Joe Flacco is the savior of quarterback. And then Drew Lock is the quarterback of the future. And then Teddy Bridgewater, he's probably a transition guy, but he'll be good. And in fact, he was the best quarterback they've had since Manning, by far. And then, of course, Wilson comes in. So that's 5 quarterbacks they've tried to sell to the fan base, and in this case, to ownership, as being the answer. Franchise guys, great quarterbacks. So I think it'll probably be Peyton, but I would hire Reich if it were up to me. Yes.
Who would you say are, pick five of the best owners?
Wow. That's like my smartest man in media.
Yeah.
Pretty low bar. Pretty low bar. Boy, 5 best owners.
I would have said coaches, but owners.
5 best owners in all of sports or in
Just in
football.
Football, NFL.
I think Kraft is very good with the Patriots. But even Kraft, you hear stories now that he's getting, it's like any relationship, even a successful one, there are going to be some bumps. And the Patriots haven't been very good the last few years since Brady left. So that he's maybe a little frustrated with the lack of progress. But I think he'd probably have to qualify as one. Jerry Jones is a great businessman, but if you're judging ownership by not just by how much money they make, but by the quality of the team. Since Jimmy Johnson has left, they've made the playoffs a handful of times, and they've won 1 Super Bowl with Jimmy Johnson's players Jimmy Johnson brought in. So left to his own devices, he has not been successful. But Kraft is one. I love the ownership in Pittsburgh. They've had 3 coaches since 1969, and they've all been successful. And in fact, Tomlin in the regular season has a better winning percentage than Chuck Noll, who won 4 Super Bowls, and Bill Cowher, who won a Super Bowl. He has the best winning percentage, and they stick with him, and they have winning records every year, even when their teams aren't very good. They're a solid, stable organization. I really like them. Out here, Kansas, the Hunts have to be. The Clark Hunt is now the owner. His father basically put the American Football League together, Lamar Hunt, in the early 1960s. They called the group of owners then the Foolish Club. But they weren't so foolish. They engineered a merger with the NFL, I think in 65 or early 66. And that led to the Super Bowl. And of course, all we have today, I think the American Football League and some of the owners there made it. I think the ownership in Buffalo is very good, very stable. It's relatively new. Ralph Wilson owned the team from the beginning and passed away. And I don't know, how many is that? Have they gotten to 5 yet?
No, thanks for taking the shot. Yeah. What about San Francisco?
And I'd say San Francisco. I think they got it right. What they did was they wanted Kyle Shanahan, and they had 2014 they had Harbaugh and they fired him. 2015 they had Jim Tomsula, who was a defensive line coach, completely unqualified to be a head coach. But that was probably, although we didn't realize it at the time, a tip-off on Vic Fangio, that they didn't hire Vic Fangio. He was the defensive coordinator,
Right.
and they didn't hire him to succeed Harbaugh. They hired a defensive line coach over Vic Fangio. That should have been a tip-off, that they didn't think Fangio was head coaching material. Well, Tom Sula wasn't either. They fired him after a year. They brought in Chip Kelly. They fired him after a year. So they want Kyle, and Kyle comes in and says, you got to give me a 6-year deal. You fired 3 head coaches in a row.
Right.
One from 14 to 15 to 16. So he gets a 6-year contract. And they say, you can hire not only your own coaches, you can hire the GM. And he said, well, I'll call a few guys. And he called John Lynch. And John Elway, and a move he didn't have to make, was pretty generous. And John Lynch and Elway are good friends. So he gave Lynch he didn't need to, Lynch wasn't working for the organization, but he said, yeah, sure, I take the job. And Lynch said, well, I don't really, I need somebody working beside me who knows the ropes. And his Elway's right-hand man was a guy named Adam Peters. So Lynch takes Peters, and Peters has been the assistant general manager. He's been the leading general manager candidate for teams the last 3-4 years. And the 49ers keep doubling the salary to get him to stay. And they maybe change the title a little bit, but he is probably now making more money than some general managers, Adam Peters. And that's another thing I want to get. I think the Broncos ought to hire Adam Peters. And I have friends who know Adam. I don't know Adam that well, but I have friends who are very close to him who've called and said, maybe Denver to take a look. And his response is, I'd love to work there. And his wife is from New York. So that's the other place he'd love to work. Although I think he turned down the Jets twice, I think. Anyway, yes, San Francisco ownership now. I think they've empowered the right people. And, you're seeing the results now. I mean, they've got a 3rd-string quarterback who might lead them to the Super Bowl. And maybe they'll win it this time.
Yeah.
One more question.
Thanks.
Yeah, okay.
Just take one more, then we have to.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, you've got the AFL and the NFL. What is their function? I mean, how much power do they have over these teams? What do they?
Oh, AFC and NFC?
Well,
You mean?
Yeah.
yeah,
AFC
yeah,
and
I'm
NFC.
sorry.
Yeah. Well, they pay them certainly enough. It's very centralized. Everything comes out of the commissioner's office. That's where all authority comes from. And there was a renegade owner. Most of you have heard of him at one time, named Al Davis. His son is not really like the father. His son will get irritated, especially when they forced a year and a half ago Davis to fire his coach, basically, because his coach had had emails come out that were
Right.
racist in nature. And he wasn't crazy about being told by the league, effectively told by the league, you got to fire your coach. But no, as entities, there really isn't an AFC or an NFC. There's an NFL, and it's very centralized, and the commissioner has great power, a lot more power than the players would like him to have. I know that. And probably it's the worst relationship between ownership and labor
Thank you.
in all sports too.
Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you. It's our custom to get up and form a circle and do the Lord's Prayer, so.
Yeah, we can move that back.
You'll be around for a little bit after. Sandy. Okay, the women have this room right after we're done, so if you want to keep chatting with Sandy, take it out to the hall. Okay?
Right behind you, right behind you. There you go.
See you next month.
Thank you. You bet.
Well, I'm glad they didn't mention the gas.
Thanks for your time.
I think I screwed something up, but.